So, hi everybody, it's MK, and we're taking 1 day break from the White Tower Sadhana teachings from Venerable, which will continue tomorrow. And we're doing it because today is a national day of celebration and rejoicing called Martin Luther King Day, which is to commemorate this amazing spiritual leader in America and his powerful presence in our country, and how he was the voice of the civil rights movement and helped through his power and support of thousands of people to change America's policy on its treatment of its citizens, and to be able to bring America to task to keep its promise that all citizens, regardless of race in America, deserve the same rights that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights promise to everybody. So I've been reading about him and wanting to share some of my feelings about this incredible human being. So I was going to try to put it in the context of the Dharma. So I wanted to share some, the main principle of the Dharma is why we practice, what's our motivation for doing what we do? Why are we showing up every day on our cushion, every day in our lives? And so I looking over Martin Luther King's life, seeing the compelling motivations that kept him totally connected to his integrity, totally bonded to his sense of purpose and his values through all of a very amazing, difficult life. And so I wanted to give some samples. There's so many examples in his life on how he truly lives so many of the principles that we also aspire within our practice. So I wanted to give some samples of that, and then give you some excerpts of some of the quotes from sermons that he's given that also have a ring of familiarity with them too on some of the Buddha's words. So the first one was this fundamental belief that he had all of his life that all human beings want to be happy and not suffer. And despite all the hatred and the racial rhetoric during his time, he said on a personal level, people were people. And that he believed that human nature had an amazing potential for goodness, which is something that His Holiness has said about humanity, that we all have in our hearts and minds an innate goodness. And so this kept Martin Luther King very much to be able to rise above a lot of the hatred, a lot of the difficulties and the obstacles, is to see that within every heart of humanity was this potential for goodness, with this filter of confusion and hatred and separation. And so he was able to keep a certain level of calm and integrity within his own mind, understanding that. The second one was a deep motivating factor through all of his life, was cherishing others. He had a deep urge when he was quite young, when he was in theological seminary and he was pondering his life as a minister, his deep urge to serve society. He loved people and he was strongly connected to the masses, and he believed that leaders were there to serve the people. And so he had this very strong connection to serve. And through most of his life, when you read his story, there was very little little, if any, self-interest, preoccupation. His whole motivation was to serve and to bring equality into the lives of so many people. And he did it with incredible determination, incredible joy, and humility. The next quality that is a huge motivating factor, hopefully in our practice, is compassion for others. And during one of the summers that he was out of seminary, he was thinking about when he had a parish that he was going to be the pastor of. He said, how am I going to bring any authenticity when I am not able to understand the suffering of my congregation? He came from a very sheltered life by black family standards in the South. He was from a middle-class family, was very sheltered, had a lot of opportunity, well-clothed, well-fed, a close, loving community, very educated. He had a doctorate in theology. But his congregation was not going to be like that. And so what he did for 1 year is he undertook what he called a self-imposed rite of passage, where he went into the rail yards and the trucking yards of Atlanta and did some grueling, back-breaking manual labor, and then went up to the fields of Connecticut, worked in the fields for a year. And during this time, he worked with some of the poorest blacks and white families. And he saw firsthand and experienced firsthand the amazing inequity in people of different color doing same amount of work and being paid very differently, being treated differently, the hostility, the humiliation of the bosses, and then the segregation, public buses, trains, lunch counters, having this curtain. He was a black man, therefore he was invisible and segregated from society. And so he wanted to have that experience because he knew that whatever congregation that he came to, those people were going to be experiencing that as part of their daily lives. So that grew his compassion to be able to see the suffering of others. And so at the age of 27, and this is just some of the few motivations that propelled him, at the age of 27, he became the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And he threw all of his heart in into being a pastor of this church. And in 1955, after about a year and a half of just a lot of joy and loving everything that he was doing, he was informed that one of his parishioners had been arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a city bus to a white passenger. That was Rosa Parks. That was in 1955. And this is the part of the Buddha teachings, is that it says, you know, you're in there practicing, you're meditating, you're cultivating in your mind all the qualities that you want to aspire to be a Buddha. But what do you do when you get off the cushion? Are you walking your talk? Are you practicing what you're preaching? And from that day when he heard about Rosa Parks, and for the next 12 years, he joined every boycott. He decided that if he was going to live and be the man of faith and compassion and honesty and truth that he was aspiring to be, that he would have to be in the front lines and be able to represent himself fully in that movement. And then for the next 12 years, the boycotts, the protests, the sit-ins, to live what he believed. And this part, I really hear His Holiness when he says to us, never give up. No matter how much discouragement, no matter how much confusion, no matter how many obstacles, never give up on yourself, never give up on others, never give up on the world. And no amount of harassment, death threats, fire bombings, incarcerations, people were still getting lynched back in the 50s for being too uppity and too outspoken about their values. Never once did he give up in those 12 years about what he was doing and why he was doing it. He inspired many people, including the students of a lot of the southern universities, who were really inspired. They wanted to see desegregation in their lunch counters. They wanted to see desegregation in the transportation that they were riding in. And so this is where the freedom rides became well known, where he was with the students as they were sitting in the buses and the trains, refusing to give up their seats, getting hauled to jail, getting kicked, getting beaten, getting harassed. No due process of the law. He was right with them. And so, and at this time when it was the most hostile, most vicious rhetoric against him in the civil rights movement, he openly condemned the Vietnam War. And his white supporters said, well, now you're being unpatriotic, you're stepping over the line. And he said, no matter where there is injustice, I have to stand. And he said that the Vietnam War was a symbol of a deeper malady that was affecting the American spirit. He was strongly opposed to it. And so on August 28th in 1963, he was in front of the Lincoln Memorial. 250,000 people came to hear him speak, and that's when he gave his speech, I Have a Dream, which if you haven't heard, I Have a Dream, search engine, it's 17 minutes of your life if you want to give yourself a gift today, is to listen to this speech. So he, 3 months later, John Kennedy was assassinated. And in his heart of hearts, when he talked to his wife and his family, he knew the writing was on the wall. And 5 years later, he was assassinated also. He was the youngest person to ever receive the Nobel Peace Prize at 35. If he was living today, his birthday was 2 days ago, he would be 82 years old. And I have a feeling His Holiness and him would be very good friends.